My family has worked this land for 3 generations, but when I saw that HOA president strutting up to my fence one morning, demanding I get rid of my cows because they were lowering property values, I had no idea my security cameras would catch them in a midnight plot that would unravel everything. Stick around to see how I taught this power-hungry HOA a lesson they'll never forget. Back in 1947, my grandfather, Henry Brooks, bought this land with every penny he'd saved from the war. I can still hear him telling me tales of how he built every fence post by hand, working from dawn till dusk. This wasn't just a piece of dirt to him. It was his American dream. He handed it down to my father, who taught me all I know about farming, tending to the animals, and doing things the right way. For decades, it was just us and a handful of other farming families out here. But about 2 years ago, these upscale developments started sprouting up, million-dollar homes with perfect lawns, right next to where my cows graze. At first, we tried to be neighborly. I even invited some of them to our annual harvest barbecue. Then, last month, a certified letter landed in my mailbox. The new HOA was laying down the law, claiming my cows were dragging down property values. Can you believe it? But what really caught my eye was what my security cameras picked up that same night. 3 figures with flashlights sneaking around my property, snapping pictures. Something was off, and I was about to find out just how deep this rabbit hole went. The next morning, I was checking the fence when I saw her, Karen Phillips, the HOA president, marching across my pasture in her high-end heels, a thick folder tucked under her arm. She had that look, like she owned the world. 2 board members trailed behind, snapping photos and frowning at my barn. I'll never forget how she waved some property maintenance ordinance in my face, declaring my cows had 30 days to go. Her voice oozed condescension as she rattled off violations. My historic barn was an eyesore, and the morning sounds of farm life were disturbing the peace. But she didn't see it coming when I pulled out the faded zoning papers my grandfather had kept all those years. Her face flushed when I showed her the stamp declaring this protected agricultural land since 1943. I told her how Henry had the foresight to lock in those protections, knowing someone might try to push us out someday. That's when Ed Larson, our retired neighbor, strolled over. Turns out he wasn't just any old retiree, he'd been a county judge. He glanced at their documents and chuckled. Later, he told me about 2 other farmers nearby who'd been pressured to sell recently. His tone hinted this wasn't just about my cows or property values. That evening, I got a call from Pete Harrison at the Dawson family farm. They'd gotten the same letter, same demands, 3 generations of farming, just like us. Now told their way of life didn't fit the neighborhood. But the HOA had messed with the wrong farmers, and I had a hunch Ed knew exactly what to do next. I couldn't shake the feeling something bigger was brewing, so I started digging through my security footage from the past month. Every Wednesday night, like clockwork, a black SUV parked at the edge of my property. At first, I thought it was kids up to no good, but when I zoomed in, there was Karen Phillips with some guy I didn't recognize, taking pictures and pointing at my land. Then, while sorting through my mail, I noticed something weird about the HOA's complaint letters. Signatures from folks like Mrs. Carter at number 42 and Mr. Jenkins on the corner, people I knew who'd always been friendly. So, I showed up at Mrs. Carter's door with one of those letters. She went pale. She'd never signed anything like that, never even heard of complaints against my farm. That's when Ed hooked me up with Mike Reynolds, a reporter at the local paper. Mike had been tracking similar stories in nearby counties, family farms selling for peanuts after HOA pressure, followed by luxury developments popping up right where they'd been. One night, my doorbell rang. It was Emily, Karen's assistant from the HOA office, trembling as she handed me an envelope. "I can't sleep knowing what they're planning," she whispered. Inside was a USB drive with board meeting recordings, emails, and a development plan I wasn't supposed to see. They weren't just after my farm. They had a list of every agricultural property in the county. The more I dug, the clearer it became. Those late-night meetings, fake complaints, the sudden squeeze on local farmers. It was all part of a bigger scheme. And when the pieces clicked, I realized this wasn't about property values anymore. These people had no clue what they'd kicked off, but they were about to learn what happens when you push a farmer with truth on his side. That Sunday morning, when I popped in that USB drive, I saw Karen Phillips in the HOA office with a guy in a sharp suit. Her husband, David Phillips, CEO of Horizon Growth Corporation. They were laughing, plotting how they'd force out every farmer in the area. Once those property values tank, he said, we'll swoop in and buy it all for nothing. It hit me hard. The same company snapping up foreclosed farms across 3 counties was run by the HOA president's husband. Every complaint, every violation, every sneaky inspection was a setup to drive us out. They'd done it before, targeting family farms one by one, using HOA rules as their weapon. In the next recording, Karen laid out their plan. Start with the Larson farm, then pressure Harrison's place. Save the stubborn one with the cows for last. They even had a timeline for each farm's downfall. But what got my blood boiling was hearing them mock my grandfather's deed. Who cares about some old paper? David laughed. By the time they figure it out, it'll be too late. I took it all to Ed. He pored over the files, his face darkening. This isn't just harassment, he said. They're manipulating values, forging documents. This is criminal. We learned they'd pulled this in 2 other communities, leaving ruined farmers behind. What they didn't get was that out here, we stick together. Word spread fast among the farming families. Pete Harrison's daughter, a city lawyer, started digging into Horizon's past projects. Everyone followed the same playbook. The local news broke the story on a Tuesday. Local HOA caught in farmland scheme, front page, with photos of my farm and those fake letters. You should have seen Karen's face when she rolled into the HOA office that morning, reporters waiting. But the real turning point was the emergency town hall that night. Farmers from across the county packed the room. Old Mr. Jenkins, who'd supposedly complained about my farm, stood up, teary-eyed. His dad had lost their farm to the same trick a decade ago. Then 3 HOA board members quit on the spot. Lisa Morgan, one of them, handed over emails proving Karen's manipulation. We were pressured to vote against farms, she said, voice shaky. This isn't what we signed up for. The bombshell came when a state investigator walked in. Our little story had caught big attention. They'd been tracking Horizon's shady land deals statewide, just needing solid proof. And thanks to that USB and my footage, they had it. The room went silent as he showed surveillance pics of David Phillips meeting county officials late at night, the same officials fast-tracking zoning changes for his projects. He announced a full investigation into the HOA and Horizon. Karen and David skipped that meeting, but by midnight, their scheme was all over the news. Sometimes justice sneaks up on you, and watching their plan fall apart on live TV was just the start. When we got Horizon's master plan, it was worse than we'd thought. Their slick presentation laid out a 5-year scheme to turn our farming community into premium lifestyle estates. Every family farm was marked for takeover. My place was labeled stubborn holdout, requires aggressive measures. They'd been plotting this for years, a war plan against rural America. Infiltrate HOAs, impose crazy rules, tank values, force sales. But their plan blew up in their faces. Emily, the HOA assistant, had been secretly gathering evidence, recordings, emails, even pics of cash changing hands in parking lots. When the state attorney general saw it, things moved quick. Then we found the smoking gun. A memo from David Phillips bragging about modernizing 3 other farming communities into luxury developments. These farmers are sitting on gold mines, he wrote. They just need the right push to sell. That push was harassment, backed by a corrupted HOA and a web of shell companies across 12 counties. They never expected a farmer with cameras and a retired judge neighbor to bring them down. They thought they could bully us out of our heritage. Instead, they exposed a corruption ring that stretched far beyond our town. One morning, David Phillips strutted onto my property with 2 slick lawyers, waving a checkbook. Name your price, he said. This development's happening. You can leave rich or leave broken. I thought of my grandfather's hands on these fences, my father teaching me this land. The check had more zeros than I'd ever seen. Then I heard a truck door slam. Pete Harrison showed up with his daughter, then Ed walked over. Within minutes, half the farming community was there. Someone filmed it all, us standing united, David trying to buy us off. Meanwhile, my security footage was playing at the county commissioners' meeting. Their scheme was toast. The next week's community fundraiser was unreal. Families who'd lost farms to Horizon drove ours to join us. Local businesses pitched in, food, legal help, everything. Even city folks from the new houses showed up, saying they moved here for real farms, not another bland development. The video of our standoff hit national news, sparking other farming communities to check their HOAs. The movement grew beyond anything we dreamed. At the final HOA meeting, we laid it all out: fake complaints, rigged values, midnight meetings. Karen and David watched their board turn on them. This wasn't just about my cows anymore. It was about saving a way of life threatened across America. The state investigation's findings were more than justice. They were vindication. We'd uncovered one of the biggest land grab schemes in state history: forged documents, bribes, a trail of wrecked farming families. I was in the barn when they arrested Karen and David. Their fancy suits couldn't save them. Charges piled up: conspiracy, fraud, racketeering. My security footage was the clincher, showing them plotting with officials meant to protect us. The courthouse was packed for their arraignment. Farmers from 3 counties, some who'd lost everything, others next on the list. When the judge, a farmer's daughter herself, denied bail, you could feel the justice. But this was bigger than 2 people. The investigation exposed Horizon's network: big city investment firms using HOAs to gobble up farmland. State reps stepped in, drafting the Heritage Farm Protection Act to shield agricultural land from HOA overreach, all because one farmer wouldn't budge on his cows. The day we heard the first guilty verdict, Pete brought his famous apple pie, and Ed couldn't stop grinning. The state's attorney stood where Karen once had, announcing Horizon's assets were frozen, their developments halted, their victims finally getting justice. Our story went national. Our little community became a symbol of fighting corporate greed. Other farmers started probing their HOAs, and the movement spread. Horizon collapsed: shell companies, fake funds, all of it. But the real win was our community coming back stronger. The new HOA president, Mrs. Carter, tore up those anti-farm rules. "This is farm country," she said, "and we're keeping it that way." The farm protection law we fought for became a blueprint nationwide. Those luxury developments? New owners turned them into farm-friendly communities with a weekly market right where Karen wanted her clubhouse. My cows are still here, grazing peacefully. Families from the new homes bring kids to see them, learning where food comes from. We started a school program too. Property values? They're higher than ever. Turns out people value real farms and strong communities. Every morning, I walk my fence line like Henry did, seeing a community that gets the worth of its farming roots. Karen and David? They're facing hard time, but their real punishment is knowing their plan didn't just fail, it made us stronger. They tried to bully me off my land with slick deals and dirty tricks. Instead, they united us, changed laws, and proved what makes America strong isn't a golf course. It's honest farmers and the heritage we protect.